What does maximum medical improvement mean? Is that different from permanent and stationary?
Permanent and stationary used to be an old term in workers' comp that was essentially a term of art. It was created to signify kind of like an artificial cutoff point in workers' compensation cases. The idea being that people are injured and some injuries get better, some don't, but these cases can't go on forever. And so the idea behind creating the term permanent and stationary was really to identify a point in time in which an injured worker was not going to get any worse or any better for the foreseeable 12 months from that particular period in time. It's usually at that point where things like permanent disability ratings and permanent work restrictions are identified by a treating physician and the QME. It's really just kind of like a cutoff point to say, hey, you know what? You've kind of gotten as good as you're going to. And regardless of what we do, it's not going to get any better or worse, regardless if that's surgery or if it's injections or testing or whatever the case may be. So that term was really created pre-2005, but after SB 899 and the adoption of the AMA Guide's 5th edition for rating permanent impairment, things switched over to using the term MMI, and MMI stands for maximum medical improvement. And those terms really just mean the same thing. The person has medically plateaued, that they're not really going to get any better, and this is kind of like an artificial cutoff point for your case, at which point, things like permanent disability are addressed, work restrictions are addressed, future medical is addressed, and you can ultimately be in a position to settle your case or get your case set for trial at that point.
Interesting. Bilal, tell me a little bit more. Whose idea was it? Oh, I don't like permanent and stationary. Why don't we just change it to maximum medical? Like, is someone just sitting there thinking about, we just should change all these terms? Like, where does this come from?
In this case, I kind of understand why it happened. I mean, it's pretty well justified. So before 2005, there was a different permanent disability rating system that was used to calculate the impairment that couldn't be resolved through medical care. So when someone had functional disabilities after their injury was treated, they would have these ratings assigned as percentages. And there used to be a completely different system. And when workers' comp as a system adopted the AMA guides for rating permanent impairment in 2005, the guides make use of the term MMI. And that term was used to replace permanent stationary largely because of the adoption of the AMA guides in the new rating system for permanent disability. And the rating systems used to be completely different. The ratings used to be really based on a combination of subjective and objective findings, as well as work restrictions and limitations. An example of this would be that you had a fixed percentage of permanent disability because you were limited to sedentary work only. The AMA guides changed that quite a bit. And the AMA guides for impairment really made the disability ratings about the functional impairment that someone has, either based on anatomical changes or limitations or actual what they call diagnosis related estimates, meaning you have this condition, therefore you have this percentage impairment, like a herniated disc in your spine, or you had a total knee replacement or a lumbar fusion, things like that. And so that whole rating system basically took over workers' comp, and because of that change, the term changed as well.
Tell me more about this AMA. Where did it come from? Why the change?
So the AMA guides is really a standardized way of assigning impairment. The current version we use in workers' comp is the 5th edition, although there is a 6th edition, although not used in workers' comp yet. But the 5th edition is what we use in workers' comp. And that AMA guide, it's literally a guidebook. It's a big green book. You can find a digital copy online. You can even download it for free, depending on what source you get it from. Not sure if it's legal or not to download the copy that you can get for free, but it's out there. You can Google it. It's easy to find. But really, if you look through it, you'll see it's like a picture book and kind of like goes chapter, body part by body part, system by system, identifying the rating types, the methodologies that a doctor is permitted to use when assigning permanent impairment for injuries. Really, it's kind of for doctors by doctors in order to give them guidance in how they discuss permanent disability when they're writing their reports. The guides are used to literally guide them in the process.
Got it. And this process within the workers' compensation system, giving someone this maximum medical improvement, the new version of permanent and stationary, which to you makes more sense, right? You like maximum medical improvement. You favor that one more than the other.
I mean, it doesn't really matter, and people, myself and doctors who've been in it for a while still use the terms interchangeably and they mean the same thing. It doesn't really matter all that much. But, the term maximum medical improvement really is what it is. It's you've reached maximum medical improvement and you're not going to get any better. And some people are, they're a little bit shocked by that. The term can be a little misleading because they don't understand that it's really a term that was created to create like this artificial cutoff point. It doesn't mean that you're at maximum medical improvement, so you're no longer injured or that you're not going to have any future medical needs or that you don't have a disability. So I think the term term can be a little confusing to people and they've never heard it before. So I do a lot of explaining, on that subject, kind of having to guide people and say, look, this doesn't mean you're better. This doesn't mean you don't need future medical care. It just means that we're at a point where the doctors feel like this is a good spot to kind of stop your case in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Within the system, right? Because you're mentioning it's not like that's the end of the road for any treatment moving forward. It just means it's the end of the road for your workers' comp claim, which will then allow you to do what I was going to ask you. This maximum medical improvement term comes up at what part? Obviously, we know that it's towards when you can't do anything further to move along your injuries and such or help them heal more than what they already are. Would someone expect to see this in the beginning of their case? Is there even like a specific time this word would come up in a claim?
It's not something you see at the beginning of a case usually. So when we think about maximum medical improvement, we think about really two things. Is this person going through progressive levels of treatment, and are there things that's still out there that the doctors feel medically could make them better? And there's a wide variety of medical treatment available to you depending on the type of injury you have and depending on how much is actually getting approved, how much you want to participate in, how much is actually appropriate given your injury. An example of this would be someone who, let's say they have a herniated disc in their back and all they got was some Tylenol and maybe an MRI to confirm that they actually had the herniated disc. A doctor would not say they're MMI after that. Medically, there's still a lot of things you can do depending on the significance of the herniation to treat it. Anti-inflammatories, physical therapy, chiropractic care, acupuncture. You can do epidural steroid injections, and ultimately, depending on the significance of the herniation, a surgery to resolve it. Maybe a fusion, maybe a laminectomy. There's different procedures that are out there. And so if a doctor said you're MMI because they gave you 3 weeks of Tylenol when you have a herniated disc, it'd be premature. And so usually you see it once you've kind of medically plateaued. Although depending on the doctor, there are people who do get prematurely deemed MMI.
I was going to ask that, me thinking outside the box. What if I needed an amputated arm because the extent of my injury, the doctor's going to cut off my arm. That's it. My arm's not going to grow back. That would be deemed MMI, right?
Yeah, but of course, like let's say you have an appendage amputated, there's post-operative physical therapy, depending on how significant it is. You can have a lot of issues with ongoing pain and psychological issues that need to be treated as a result of the amputation as well. It's a lot of comorbidities. But I think the biggest issue we see with people being prematurely deemed MMI is largely depending on who the doctor is. We take on a lot of cases from people who are unhappy with their doctor, and it's usually the doctor assigned by the insurance company, which, surprise, surprise, isn't on their side. And you see a lot of people who get prematurely kicked out of their medical care by the doctor because there's this immense pressure to essentially downplay the scope of their injuries and get them back to work as soon as possible. At least close their claim. So we do see that quite a bit.
And what does that mean? Like, what if you're one of those that gets prematurely deemed MMI? What are your options? What do you do?
It can be catastrophic for you, right? Because if you're in a position where your symptoms are so significant that you can't go back to work, yet your doctor has given you either a work slip to go back full duty, or even in a limited capacity, the work restrictions still aren't significant enough because of your injuries, and you physically can't go back to work because it's going to hurt you. You're really in a tough spot. And there's ways to combat that a little bit, either going through a QME if you still have a right to treatment, getting a second opinion, at least a consult. But for that interim step, the doctor is going to say, go back to work, you're MMI, here's your work restrictions, but you haven't had a fair opportunity to treat. And so you're forced into a position where you may have to abandon your job because you can't do the work and you're being sent back. And unless you go to another doctor and obtain another work slip, you're in really serious trouble at that point.
That's a huge battle, if you put it that way. Great. So then should someone be happy about being MMI in that sense? Let's say everything rolled out the way it should have been. It wasn't prematurely, given in the case. Should someone see this is a good thing? I know what you're going to say. It depends.
The honest to God response is that most people are incredibly happy to put workers' compensation behind them and never talk to me again. Well, they like me, but they never talk to the insurance adjuster again, never talk to the work comp people again, never deal with work comp in general. I always joke, I always tell clients it's been a pleasure and I hope I never have to talk to you again because it means you got hurt at work and you're back in this awful system dealing with awful things. I think more often than not, people feel a sense of relief when they're MMI because they know hey, I'm I'm getting near the finish line. I'm getting to a point where I've done what I can within the system and I can put it behind me. So MMI can come in an opportune time. There can be a lot of complications with work restrictions and things associated with it. I would say, a lot of times, provided someone's really been given a fair opportunity to treat, they've gotten their fair share of benefits, they've seen good doctors, what's been done has been done to fix them, then yeah, as long as the rating is good and we're content with the report, I think most people are pretty happy.
Yeah, if you put it in a positive way, in that way, if it's like you're getting out of the system finally, and you're not just coming out empty-handed per se. You have a doctor has worked on you, and you've gotten as much possible, as much as you needed to get you by, to get you through, right? Once you get MMI'd and they offer a settlement and you're done with your case, can someone go outside then and go to the regular doctors and keep treating? You mentioned earlier that just because they're MMI'd or permanent and stationary, it doesn't mean it's the end of the road for their medical needs. How does that come into play?
Well, two things. One, when you're MMI, usually that's a point where you can settle your case because you have disability ratings. And I can tell you a lot of times insurance companies will undervalue your case until you get those ratings. Even if they know the writing's on the wall in terms of the value of the case, you kind of have to hold their feet to the fire. And, some cases getting your permanent disability ratings, it reinforces the value of the case and it can be really beneficial in getting more for your case than if you're settling early on. If you have a good report with good ratings, of course. But on the other side of things, depending on whether or not you settle out your case with open medical or closed medical really tells you whether or not your story ends with workers' comp. You can be MMI and still have medical care under workers' comp if you settle your case with open medical. If you choose to take a lump sum settlement, we call those a compromise and release settlement in workers' comp. Usually that means they're buying out your medical care, in which case, yeah, you're free to go to whatever doctor you want, whenever you want to treat your injuries.
Right. Well, and we've talked about compromise and releases. You can find that in the episodes. I'll even link it up on this video as well for you guys watching on YouTube. For those of you listening on the podcast, I will go ahead and drop that link to that conversation in the description below. There's a lot, I guess, that goes on with the medical maximum improvement. Earlier, you also mentioned that you explain this a lot to people because they become afraid when they hear this word. Have we talked about all of the concerns you've seen come across in your law firm?
No, not at all. The biggest concern I think people have, it's not the value of the case. It's not the fact that they've been determined MMI. It's not that they need future medical care. It's their work status. When you have temporary disability, you're temporarily off of work, you're getting better, your work restrictions are not considered permanent. When you have permanent work restrictions, that's often the defining factor about whether or not the employer can actually keep you on as an employee long term. And a lot of times people are given work restrictions from the doctor that they don't necessarily agree with, right or wrong. Oftentimes the doctor's not trying to upset you. The doctor's not trying to force you into unemployment. The doctor is just giving you work restrictions that they feel are prophylactic, right? Things that you shouldn't do going forward to ensure that you're not going to really hurt yourself even further. And a lot of those things aren't under your control as a patient of that doctor. Sometimes you can talk to the doctor and say, hey, look, doc, I know I struggle, but I'd really love to go back to work and they can only take me if I'm full duty. So please don't give me work restrictions. And some doctors will say, yeah, I'll go with that. We'll see what happens, at least on a trial basis, go back to work and we'll see how it goes. And if it sucks and we'll write up work restrictions, but they'll work with the injured worker. Other times the doctors will just give the work restrictions they see fit medically without necessarily thinking about whether or not the employer is going to be able to accommodate those work restrictions. And once the employer gets those work restrictions, they have to respect them. An employer can't say, we got these work restrictions, come back to work full duty. That would be disability discrimination. So usually the employer has to sit down with the work restrictions and meet with you, the patient, and they call it the interactive process where they determine whether or not long-term they can accommodate the permanent work restrictions. If not, then they may be able to just simply lay you off, which means you're out of a job. And that's something that's really scary to a lot of people. It's probably the thing people are scared of most. What am I supposed to do next? How am I supposed to pay my bills? How am I supposed to take care of my kids and put food on the table? They don't care about whether or not I need future medical care, or their settlement may be, 100,000, 120,000, 10,000 to 15,000. Those differences don't matter as much as their livelihood long term. And I think those big long term concerns about employment are probably the biggest concern.
Well, I'll just go find myself another job with a new boss who doesn't know that I had an injury, and I won't tell him about my work restrictions and start all
Well,
over.
that's the question, right? People always ask me hey, I'm MMI, I have these permanent work restrictions. Is this like a permanent record? Is every employer in the future going to know about it? And the answer to that is no. It's these work restrictions are for this case and your current employer. Whether or not you choose to disclose those at a later date to a new employer, that's entirely on you. Of course, if they ask you to work full duty and you later on say that you had these work restrictions that you need, then that may get you into trouble. Not necessarily like legal trouble, but maybe they not be able to have you on anymore.
Okay, well, that's a lot to digest. It's a huge, powerful word. Again, people would just say age difference has anything to do with who uses permanent and stationary versus who uses medical maximum improvement.
The old timers, myself included. No, I'd say, anyone who's been in the game now for, 15, 20 plus years still remembers the term as
Okay.
it's used in, the different rating systems and stuff. But we still see them used interchangeably in the report. It's very common, at least in the industry, no one differentiates between the two.
Okay, well, then I guess this sums up exactly what someone should expect when they see this term. Where would it show someone? Is this on a doctor report? Does someone get a letter in the mail? Where would someone get this notification that you have been MMI?
Yeah, usually it's in a doctor's report, primarily QME reports and AME reports. Primary treating physicians will put it in there too. All doctors in your workers' comp case should be commenting on permanent disability and MMI date, things like that. So usually it's in the medical reports that you'd get from your doctors.
Does an MMI ever get reverted? Does it get like, haha, never mind, I was just kidding, you're not MMI?
All the time, all the time. Yeah, MMI it's a fluid status. An example of this is, you could go to a doctor, they could say that you're MMI, but let's say another doctor says you need surgery. And so clearly if you needed surgery, you weren't MMI yet in most cases. Surgery is almost always to improve your function, right? They don't just do surgery to like, maybe this will kind of like do something to make you feel a little better. It's usually like, hey, if we do this surgery, it's going to alleviate a lot of pain or it's going to improve your function, something like that. So a lot of people are prematurely deemed MMI before they've had surgery, in which case they get surgery and then they're not MMI anymore. Or you can be MMI for only certain body parts and not others. You may have plateaued medically for, carpal tunnel at the same time you've had a herniated disc in your neck, in which case, maybe your carpal tunnel's been operated on, but you're still getting care for your neck and you haven't plateaued yet. And so you can shift statuses and you can have different statuses for different body parts.
This has been amazing. I love
Mhm.
it. The amount of information that's just being thrown out. It's like, whoa. Because again, there's a significant amount of situations where this word would come out and how you would handle it depending on the case and the severity and who you're dealing with, obviously, as well with the primary treating physicians, what doctor was essentially taking care of you and deemed you MMI. So, is there anything else that we have not discussed before we close out this episode that you feel someone should know in regards to the powerful word maximum medical improvement?
Yeah, when you're MMI, your benefits change. You could be off of work getting temporary disability while you're getting better. When you're MMI, you switch to permanent disability payments based on whatever rating the doctor has assigned in your case. Permanent disability rates are paid at a significantly lower rate than temporary disability, depending on your earnings. Temporary disability is calculated generally by saying you get 2/3 of what your average weekly wage was pre-injury. Your gross earnings, not your post-tax earnings. Permanent disability max payment is $290 per week. So if you're earning, say, $1,000 a week before your injury and you're on TD, you should be getting $667 per week. Now, if you're MMI, you're permanent stationary or maximally medically improved, you're going to get swapped over to permanent disability, assuming you do have a rating, and that's going to be paid at $290 a week. So all of a sudden, as someone who's off of work, you're missing $400 per week. So really, MMI can be financially significant for people who are off of work. And so you kind of have to, if you see that your doctor says like, hey, maybe at the next visit, I'm going to say you're MMI, alarm bells should be going off. Hey, am I really in a place to go back to work, to deal with permanent work restrictions? What if I'm still treating? I don't like this doctor. I feel like they're just kicking me out early. Whatever the case is, you better address that because it's going to come up fast and it's going to be a big financial difference for you.
And the idea is that if you are MMI'd, the idea would be you would probably find a different job that accommodates whatever opportunity you have to kind of work around with, right? Let's say that you no longer can do the job that you were doing and you're going to get paid for what you can do now, but it might not be well paid as when you were before. And this is where those $290 supplement what you are no longer doing. Is that a thing?
Sort of, it was designed to compensate you for the lost function that you have. We do these calculations. They're called rating strings that take into account things like the type of body part injured, the type of work that you were doing when you were injured, how old you were when you were injured. Those things don't change all that much. established. And quite frankly, the benefits people get paid are so crappy and so out of date. The last time there was a change in permanent disability rates was 2013. So it's been forever. So really, you can go back to work full duty, you can go back to work modified duty and still be MMI regardless. And whether or not you have a rating doesn't really have any bearing on whether or not you're going to have work restrictions. If you have a higher rating, typically that means you're more injured. Typically it means higher work restrictions and the likelihood that you're not going back to work full duty. But, those things are typically looked at a little bit independently. And the doctors really, their job's only to determine your ratings and your work restrictions. It's on your employer then to determine if they can take you back, regardless of what your rating is.
Yikes. Okay, that is a lot to digest. So it's been great, Bilal. Thank you so much. As always, we learn a lot of stuff in regards to the workers' compensation world. That is the whole idea of this podcast. And once again, if you're new to the podcast, make sure you subscribe, and that way you can get informed of every time we upload something new. At the same time, if you're listening and you just happen to stumble upon this episode and you know someone that can use this information, please go ahead and share it as well. Definitely check out Bilal and his team, PacificWorkers.com. They have a ton of stories, a ton of experience. If you're dealing with the system yourself and you're in this pickle of trying to figure out, am I being prematurely deemed MMI, then I would highly suggest call Pacific Workers. They are the sponsors for the podcast. And even if you don't call Pacific Workers, get just any type of consultations, because you could be definitely put into a situation that you're not going to want to be in, and it's not fun. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Bilal?
I mean, lots, right? We can go down the rabbit hole, but I think I spoke my piece for this episode.
Right. Sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We'll catch you guys on the next episode of Work Comp Talk.